Happy Wednesday, students. I wanted to make a video that answered an announcement that answered questions that some students had about the upcoming presentation. So I'm going to go through this announcement and just talk about what some of the expectations are and just some tips and guidance on both the presentation as well as the actual PowerPoint as well as your narration. So first of all, if we look at, there are three components really if we look at how you're going to be graded on this. Let me go ahead and open up and let's go over that rubric real quick. So we're going to look at this rubric and let me move it over here. So you've got what's essentially invention, organization, and mechanics. These three categories, which are worth 65% of your grade, are the presentation itself, the actual PowerPoint. Delivery is your narration of your PowerPoint, and we will talk about that in this announcement. And then that is worth 20% of your grade. And then 15% of your grade will be done next week, starting April 29th, due May 2nd. That's part 2 of the assignment. And that is reply or response, might be a better way of putting it. This is not a peer review. This is your thoughts on 3 of your classmates' PowerPoint or video or whatever the product ends up being. So they'll be about 50 to 75 words apiece, each one being worth about, or being exactly worth 5% of your assignment. So that will happen next week, starting April 29th on Monday, being due on May 2nd on Thursday. So let's start talking about the actual PowerPoint, which is 65% of your grade and is divided into invention, organization, and mechanics. All right, let me go ahead and put that down. Let's go back to that announcement. All right, so your PowerPoint should be professional and academic in appearance. Remember what you're doing. You are presenting scientific information. You are presenting professional information. If this were a real presentation and you were a member of that discipline, you would be presenting to peers in that discipline. If you had fancy, like flashy transitions and lots of animation flying in and out, sparkly stuff, cartoonish looking graphics, you really decrease your professional credibility. This should look like a professional presentation. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you are going to include 2 types of visuals in your presentation. You're going to have those tone setting visuals and the informational visuals. So I will talk about that in a moment here. That's what's highlighted in yellow. Let's talk about this tone setting visual. So as I say here, I want you to avoid cartoonish graphics. Your visuals should be there to set a tone, to set a theme, to maybe evoke some kind of emotion. They are not there to be silly or funny or cute or anything like that. So if you have a presentation on an animal, let's just say, don't include some cute cartoon of a whale or of a polar bear. Make sure that you are remembering that you are trying to emulate being a scientific professional researcher. All right. So about the text on each slide, you need to keep the text on each slide to a minimum. You are not cutting and pasting your text from your paper and leaving it like that. Yes, you could cut and paste as your first step, just to get the information on there. But you need to pare down that information to talking points. You don't want complete sentences, long paragraphs. You want talking points. You want them to be bulleted. That's important because your viewer is not able to read and consume all that information and also listen to you present. The bulk of the information needs to be delivered orally through your narration, through your presentation. The visuals, the words and the pictures on your screen are there as placeholders and as cues, visual cues to you when you're presenting and to your audience. So do not have big chunks of paragraph, long sentences. You'll lose points for that. You'll definitely lose points for that, just as you will lose points if you have these sort of silly looking graphics and animations. All right. I really recommend that you start after your title slide, start with a compelling hook slide. This can be a quote from your paper, as it is in my sample PowerPoint, but it can be a quote from somewhere else too. Just remember to cite that quote. It can be some very compelling, interesting quote from someone famous or something that you've read. You just have to remember to cite that. You want to kind of think about this presentation, think about all those TED Talks that you see on YouTube. You are trying to convince me, the viewer, that your research that you're presenting is compelling and noteworthy. All right, a note, I'm going to touch on this highlighted note about the graphics that you use in your paper. So I've said that you need to include the 2 graphics that you included in your literature review. I need to say that if the graphic that you used, if it's the table or graph or chart or whatever, it is super dense with material, hard to read, you really probably want to think about it finding an alternate graphic instead of a very dense chart. For example, if we look at my sample, I'm going to pull it over. This is a good example for this. This table, which is great in a paper, does not work well in a presentation because it's too much information for you as the presenter and too much information for the viewer. So if I were editing this, I would say to myself, change this table. Do not have this table. You want something like this. This figure here, this bar chart, is perfect. It's easy to read, easy to explain, clear. So this is the kind of thing you want to avoid. This works great in a paper. Remember, you're not writing a paper, you're doing a presentation. All right. Here's what I mean about the quote. So you want some very compelling quote for your hook slide. All right. So make sure that your presentation has a cohesive theme and tone that matches the subject of your paper. If we look at my sample, there are some things about this that are really, they work well. There are some things that don't work as well. You can see that the idea behind this presentation, remember this is kind of trending towards that medical. So this starts off with this sort of blister pack, kind of in blue-gray, so it gives sort of a clinical feel. So that sets the tone for this presentation. This slide, while has its merits on its own, I don't think really works all that well in this particular presentation. It feels really different, especially with this slide following. So if I were redoing this one more time, I would change this picture out and I would change this picture out, just like I would change this table out. All right. So really look through and think about the theme and tone. I recommend for your narration that you use a recording program like ScreenPal that I mentioned in the Monday memo. It is free. It's what I use to do my presentations. You can do them like I'm doing right now without the little picture in the bottom, or you can have your face in the bottom. I would love it if you guys included your face down there. It would make it more like an in-person presentation. But try to think about doing a video instead of just narrating your PowerPoint. Just remember, you've got to upload both the video and the PowerPoint. I need that PowerPoint to be able to grade it. But think about it. It makes it's more cohesive. It's more like a regular presentation rather than having to stop at each slide and start narrating again. When you're narrating your presentation, do not simply read your slides. You will lose points, and delivery is worth 20% of your grade. You want to tell me about the information on each slide. Your slide is not going to have long sentences and paragraphs, right? It's going to be bulleted points. You need to talk about each of those bulleted points. You should name those researchers and those articles as you go through each slide and explain each study. This is very important. That is what the literature review functions to do. That is what it's there to do, is talk about the research. So you need to name those researchers. You don't have to name all 20. You would say Smith et al. In their 2020 study. Name the article if you want. That would be helpful for the viewer to follow along. All right. Now, for this week's virtual assignment, the peer review, you don't need to have narration included. You want to just have a basic PowerPoint for your classmates to review. When you're doing your review, there is no worksheet. What you want to do is go through each slide and say, does this all hang together? Is there too much text? Do you see misspellings? Do you see use of second person, for example? Are your bullet points parallel? Do the graphics carry a theme? Are the figures hard to read, dense? So you're going to basically go through each slide and decide if you think they work. Does it hang together? And trust me, your classmates want your feedback. They would rather have your feedback. Don't be shy about giving that feedback. All right. So anything you need help with, go ahead and send me an email or stop by my office. On Monday's memo, I'm going to cover this part 2 of the presentation. So Monday morning on April 29th, when you open up your Blackboard, you'll get the information on this part 2 of the presentation, your 3 replies to the student. So never fear, I will talk about that. Don't forget to do your extra credit, your 10 points, your course evaluation. That's due on April 28th, the same day the papers due, or the presentation. All right.